Hey everybody, this is Dream, and before I get started, I just want to shout out the Patreon subscribers, Gerald P, Patrick B, and Andrews B. Really do thank you guys for joining. And if you're interested in that, feel free to look in the description below for a link to Patreon. As such, also check in the description for a link to Discord. Anybody can join Discord for free, it's fine. And we talk a lot about fantasy in there and have all sorts of different stuff going on, so come check that out. And make sure to like and comment and subscribe on this video. I really do appreciate when you guys do that, especially liking the videos. Those have gone up a lot lately, and I really appreciate all you guys for watching and hanging out in Discord and stuff like that. So with that said, let's go and get into the players that we like today. First of all, I'm going to tell you some of the stacks that I got. I think Texas, Minnesota, the LA Dodgers, the Angels, and San Francisco are all stackable teams. There's a couple other teams that are kind of looking pretty decent, but we have some really bad pitching on this slate. And I think we got some really good options when it comes to stackable teams, as well as individual players that we can maneuver in here. Alright, so let's go and get into the pitchers I like. And quite frankly, this slate is void of just top-tier pitching, where we just feel super confident with everybody. But there's a couple guys I like pretty good here. One of them is Robbie Ray against Oakland. In 3 games against Oakland this season, he scored 37, 19, and 22 points. He's had two bad games the last 2 starts, but he's done that a couple times this season, and he's always bounced back fine. So I think he's in a great spot here to have a decent game against Oakland. Now, keep in mind that Oakland has been pretty good lately, but again, he's had 3 games against them, 28 strikeouts in those games, averaging 26.5 fantasy points a game. So I think he's in a great spot. Lance Lynn is another guy I really like for the White Sox against Cleveland. Now, he hasn't been quite as good against Cleveland. In 4 games, he's averaging 13.7, but in the last 10 games, he's only had 1 game under 17 fantasy points, and he's been over 22 in 7 of the last 10. So he feels pretty safe on this particular slate because he's just pitching really well lately. And so obviously his opponent's not ideal, but we're not going to find anybody that's in a super ideal situation today. If I look at Tristan McKenzie, he's going up against the White Sox. He just really doesn't excite me in this situation, especially because he, aside the fact he's gotten 22 fantasy points a game, he's had 2 really good games against them and 1 really bad one, and he's just really inconsistent this year. He's been really kind of up and down lately, not having a lot of high-scoring games. So he is a little bit safer than some of the other options, but his price tag also makes him really hard to want to utilize here. Then we have Blake Snell for San Diego against St. Louis. Now, on the surface, he looks pretty good here, but he hasn't been. He had 1 game against St. Louis where he got 18 points. He has 6 strikeouts, but I don't think he hasn't been pitching all that well lately. He's very boomer bust, and the matchup is not the most appealing one on the slate. And then finally, we have Luis Severino. He's in an interesting spot against Pittsburgh, who's just completely terrible right now. And he's even scored 21 fantasy points against Pittsburgh. But he's been very inconsistent lately. Not only that, but he's coming back from injury, so he's probably going to be on a pitch limit. And so he just seems too uneasy, and he doesn't really get the strikeouts that we want in this particular situation either. But, if as a second pitcher, with Ray and Lynn actually being cheaper than all those guys, it makes them kind of interesting. We have 2 other pitchers just to mention. Miles Mikolas against San Diego. Not a very good matchup for him, and he's very boomer bust. But he hasn't been super good lately. Only 13 fantasy points a game last 10, and I don't really love him in this matchup either. And then I'll mention Dustin May for the Dodgers against Arizona. Now, he's had a couple of good games, but he's also had a couple of really bad ones, and so he's really hard to peg down, and he really doesn't get the strikeouts so far that we really want. And then, so that's pretty much what I have at pitcher, guys, that we want to look at. With that said, let's go and get into the players themselves. So at catcher, we have a really limited options here of guys that are actually pretty good. One of them being Will Smith. Now, he's been boomer bust lately, 6.1 the last 10, but I think he's in a good spot against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Ideally, if we're lucky, we'll get a Austin Barnes game, and he'll get to opportunity here where he's hit batting 400 for the last 10 games, including 3 home runs, 10.9. I really hope he plays because this is just a limited amount of value on the slate, really, and then add to the fact that we'll have an opportunity with him to have a cheap catcher that actually has some solid opportunity. All right, so another couple catchers that I'll mention is Adley Rutschman for Baltimore. He's in a pretty good spot here for Baltimore against Detroit, and he hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well as Austin Barnes has, but he's still hitting okay. 6.3 the last 10, and he's got a home run threat situation going. And then somebody else I'll mention is Gary Sanchez for Minnesota. Now, he's been kind of terrible lately, but he has home run potential in this matchup against bad pitching, and so I think he makes him somebody to take a look at. Depending on who Texas rolls out there, you might consider Texas's catcher, depending on who it is. But that's somebody I think is in a good situation. Jonah Heim, if it's him, then I would definitely take a look at him, though his price is a little bit higher than it has been. There's just not a lot of value at catcher today, or a lot of guys that you even want to potentially roster. Like Atlanta's not on the slate. Neither is a couple other teams that tend to have catchers that we like to roster here. But at first base, we have plenty of good options. First of all, being Jose Miranda. Here he is. So he's been batting 205 last 10 with a home run and about 6 fantasy points a game. But he's in a really nice plus matchup here. And so I think he's kind of going to have a good opportunity here to have a big game. Same with his teammate Luis Arraez. If he plays, he's in a good spot here. He's hitting 281 the last 10 games, and it's just a matter of time before he has himself a big game, which he's very capable, and his batting average will come back up to around 300 as he goes forward. Then we have Nathaniel Lowe for Texas. I really like Texas in this matchup against Davidson of the LA Angels, and he's been hitting the ball really well lately, 333. He's been hitting the ball for a while really, really good, and I think he's in a great spot to have a big game here against the Angels. Then we have Ryan Mountcastle. He hasn't been quite hitting the ball as well as we'd really like, 212 the last 10 games, but this is a big old plus matchup, and I think he can bounce back and have a home run in this one. Then Shohei Ohtani is in a great spot against Dunning. Dunning really hates lefties, and Ohtani likes hitting guys like Dunning, so he has some real good potential here to get a home run and get a lot of fantasy points. Ty France is in a great spot here for Seattle against Oakland. He's been hitting 7 fantasy points a game for the last 10. He actually had an extremely big game last game, and so I really look for him to have a good shot in this particular game as well. And then Rizzo for the Yankees. Obviously pretty expensive here, but I think he's in a great spot against Pittsburgh, who's just got terrible pitching today, and he'll have an opportunity to have big points. At second base, we have some good options. Chris Taylor for the Dodgers is in a great spot. I really like the Dodgers on this slate. It's going to be kind of hard to roster a lot of them. Why am I not? There he is. He's one guy that you can roster pretty easily. 273 last 10 games, 7.4. He's $3,400. It makes him pretty easy to roster here, no matter what pitchers you use. Marcus Semien is another guy I like for the Texas Rangers. I really like Texas in this. He's hitting 405 the last 10 games, 12 fantasy points a game. And he's had 2 home runs in those games as well as a triple and some other stats. So I really like him. Now, the next guy here is Sergio Estrada, but he might not play because he's reportedly day-to-day now. And so if he doesn't play, then whoever comes into his place is probably somebody you're going to have to take a look at just because of the plus matchup that goes along with the San Francisco-Colorado situation. Wilmer Flores is a guy that looks like he'll be pretty good again. But his price has really come up lately, and so it's going to be a little harder to roster him at the price point, especially considering the only reason he's really valuable right now is playing in San Francisco. Gleyber Torres for the Yankees is in a great spot. A little bit less expensive, too. Averaging 11 fantasy points a game for the last 10. They're really hitting the ball where the Yankees are finally starting to get going. And then, of course, I already mentioned Luis Reyes. At third base, we have Josh Jung, who's in a great spot here for Texas. I really like this kid, and I think he's going to continue to hit the ball pretty well. He's hitting 6 fantasy points a game last 10, but he's almost minimum priced, and so he doesn't need a ton of points really to pay off for you here. Then we have Gio Urshela from Minnesota, another guy I really like in this set. He's hitting 343 for the last 10 games. I think he's in a great spot. I think Minnesota's in a great spot here. And then we have Gunnar Henderson for Baltimore, who it seems like every day that I don't use him, he hits a home run, which has been literally 3 times. But he's averaging 11 fantasy points a game for the last 10, and so I like him in this particular matchup. He's been doing a little bit of everything. And then Justin Turner, I love this. I love him today. I think he's going to hit a home run, but his price is on DraftKings is high. Has come, so he's averaging 12.4 fantasy points a game, and so I understand why his price point's up there. But it's disappointing because I really like to use him, and I find it's probably going to be pretty difficult to get him in here along with some Colorado or San Francisco players, because we have like Ryan McCann here. It's $5,200, and he's in a great spot, averaging 10 fantasy points a game, 297. But it's really going to be tough to roster a couple of those type of players. Josh Donaldson's another great spot here for the Yankees. 9.6 for last 10, including a 290 batting average with 3 home runs. I think the Yankees are all in a really good spot. Unfortunately, it's going to be hard to roster some of them. And shortstop, we have Brandon Crawford. If you need to save some money, this might be a good way to do it. Playing in Colorado, he's going to have some upside in this particular matchup. He's done good against Colorado this season, and so I like him in this one. Then we have J.P. Crawford. J.P. Crawford for Seattle. He looks like he's in a pretty solid spot, hitting almost 300, 7.1 fantasy points a game, including a home run the last 10. I think he's in a great spot. And then we have Javier Baez for the Detroit, who's just really been hitting the ball well, and I really like how he's been playing. 375 last 10 with 8 fantasy points a game, and you can save a little money with him on the roster. Then, of course, we have Trey Turner. Oh, sorry, I got something in my eye. He's hitting pretty good lately as well. What did I get in my eye? Holy crap. He's averaging 10.6 fantasy points a game with a home run, a couple triples, a couple stolen bases and stuff. He's really been playing well. And then a guy that, I don't necessarily want to roster him, but I feel like I have to include him because of his ridiculous play lately. Elvis Andrus. He's averaging 364, 14 fantasy points a game. And if you look at his stats, his stats look almost like Judge's stats, where he doesn't have any sub 10 games hardly. And he's just been playing ridiculous. Obviously, he's in a tougher matchup here, but I think he's in a great spot. And as a player, he's just absolutely torching the ball. And even if he doesn't hit McKenzie very well, he'll have the opportunity late in the game to beat up on the bench. So I really like him. Corey Seager is another guy I really like against Davidson for Texas. Obviously pretty expensive, but he's averaging 8 fantasy points a game. And then Isaiah Kiner, Palafa for the Yankees. He's been hitting the ball really well. 8.7 fantasy points last 10. The Yankees are finally starting to play like their talent suggests they should. And so he's somebody you got to consider as well. I almost forgot Carlos Correa from Minnesota. For against Kansas City, he's averaging 9.5, 375 last 10 with 2 home runs. Somebody you definitely have to, if you want that Minnesota stack, he's definitely somebody you got to try to figure out in that. On to outfielders. We don't really have a ton of outfielders today on this slate. So a lot of guys play multiple positions, and I'm not going to mention them a second time, but we do have some good options here. Mike Yastrzemski for San Francisco. He just had a huge game last time against San Francisco, and against Colorado, and it looks like he'll probably be either leadoff or maybe the 6th or 7th man on the roster. Regardless of where he hits, this is the type of situation where we want to utilize him. He's averaging 9.3 against Colorado this year, and I look for him to have another solid game against them. And then we have Jock Peterson, who hasn't hit the ball well, but he's in Colorado, and we know how Colorado is. Guys can raise their batting averages substantially here, and the pitching is not going to be great again, so we definitely take a look at that one. Adolis Garcia for Texas is another guy I really like. He's hitting 286 with 11 fantasy points a game and 3 home runs. I think he's a home run threat in this game against the Angels. And then Mookie Betts for the Dodgers. He's not been hitting the ball that well, but he is kind of due for a home run, and so I look for him to potentially do that in this plus matchup for him. And then another kind of guy I like is Cedric Mullins. He's kind of due for a big game, and so I think he's in a good spot. Only he's super expensive, unfortunately. And then finally, the guy that's got 60 home runs, Aaron Judge, absolutely just blasting balls every single game. I mean, it's hard to dislike him because of all these plus 10 things. His price point is just it's meteoric at this point, $6,400. But if you can figure out a way to put him in there, then he might pay off for you in a big way. So I think overall it's a pretty solid slate. It is going to be a little bit difficult on the pitching angle. It's also going to be a little bit difficult to find enough value that you're going to feel comfortable. But overall, I think that's going to be doable to make a quality lineup here that you're happy with. And so if you do have any comments or questions, or if there's any players you felt like I left out, feel free to leave those below in the comments. And have a nice day, guys.